Dankie.
Baie dankie Japie, baie welkom aan almal. Ons is baie bly om hierdie aanbieding vanaand te kan doen. Ons gaan 'n bietjie vir julle wys hoe lyk die nuwe kleinveeproduksieverslag wat ons ontwikkel het. Spesiaal vir ons kleinveeteelers. Ons hier by Stamboek wat betrokke is by ons kleinveeteelers het bietjie koppe bymekaar gesit en besluit wat kan ons teruggee aan ons teelers wat nuttig is vir hulle en wat regtig van belang is en wat help om al die harde werk wat hulle doen om daai inligting op Logix te kry om vir hulle ietsie te kan teruggee daarmee. So hierdie verslag het wat ons vanaand gaan wys, gaan dan 'n bietjie wys hoe julle data tans lyk op Logix. Dit gaan ook bietjie vir julle die geskiedenis gee van julle kudde, soos die data ingekom het oor jare. Nie net die aantal rekords nie, maar ook die gemiddeldes van julle kuddes vir al die eienskappe waarmee ons werk. En ons gaan ook vir julle wys hoe julle kuddes dan vergelyk met die ras se gemiddeldes en aantalle. Nou my kollega Jason het hierdie verslag ontwerp en hy gaan hierdie aanbieding vir julle doen.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Japie and Dr. Bernice, for the warm welcome this evening. As both have said before tonight, I will be talking about the Logix flock analysis of the Kudde Analyse. This report has been under development for quite a while now, but we are ready to show it to the breeders. So thank you all for joining this evening. It's really good to see all of you here. Okay, so I will go through it section by section now, but what's important to note is that the data on the front, it will state that the data comes from the BLUP run date, and it will tell you when your BLUP run date was, and then the Logix date for all the stuff that's on Logix. So because I'm giving you these two dates because some of the data is reliant on the BLUP run, while all the active data is reliant on the Logix data. So the Logix data is the more recent stuff because some breeds only run their BLUP analysis once a month, while some breeds are running it once a week. So it's just there to know when was your last BLUP run.
Thank you.
Okay. So the first, in the beginning, you will get an active herd summary. So I just said earlier that it's important to note between the BLUP or the historical data and the Logix, which is the active data. So all the active data is with regards to the animals that are currently on your farm, that they are alive according to the system of Logix. So here we have on the left, we have a registration status. So it just indicates the total number of animals that you have. And you can compare that to the breed. So you can see the size of your herd, as well as if they are registered, if they are being recorded, or if they're in their lamb book, as well as the inbreeding level. We have these little robots, and we'll explain it on the right here when we get to the level of production. Here, these circles are just active animals. We split them into two categories, those that are less than 2 years of age and those that are greater than 2 years of age. We know that the majority of your animals that are older than 2 years are your ewe flock, or your female animals that are breeding all of your lambs. And those that are younger than 2 years are most probably the last 2 years of lambs. And that will be a bit more 50-50 than the one on the right. And then also just splitting your active animals into males and females and the total amount, and hoping that they correspond and all these numbers add up together. Okay, then on the right, we have the level of production. It just helps you see how many of the animals in your flock are measured, as well as what is their average. And then you can compare, okay, how many animals in the breed that are active, that are currently alive, are also measured, and what is their average. So that's the gemiddeld is the average of the trait, and you can compare it to the breed. you will see that there is like a robot style going on here. So if it's green, we've given you the explanation that it is the same or better as the breed average. If it's orange, like the post-weaning weight here for this table is 38.4 and the breed average is 45.4. But if it's yellow, he's still within one standard deviation. So that means that he's still, that 65% of the animals lie one standard deviation below and above the average. But I will show you with a nice graph just now with regards to that. And then we do it for all the traits that you has measured. And you will see here under speengewig, we split it into singles, twins, and triplets, because we know that twins and singles will have differing weights. And here we can see that a single lamb on average weighed 31.4 kgs in this flock, and a twin weighed 29.7 at weaning. So it's just to give you a good idea of what are the weights of your singles, your twins, and your triplets. Depending on the type of breed that you are breeding with, you will be measuring different traits. You will now see that this table contains wool traits. It's obviously a breeder that is measuring, that has a wool breed and is participating in production recording of those wool traits. So we do include, and it is, the report is flexible according to what you measure and what breed you have. So depending on what breed you have, you might have different content. But here we just have a bigger breeder, a breeder with a larger flock. The previous one was only about 500 animals. This one is 2,000 animals. And we can see that this breeder measures birth weight in comparison to the breed. He's measuring 25% of the birth weights in this breed. But when we look at this, the weaning weights, he's measuring almost all the same amount of animals that he is for birth weight, but the majority of the breed is being measured for weaning weight, as weaning weight is a compulsory weight for an animal to be included in the BLUP evaluation. So we have the same thing going on as I explained on the last page. We then split those statistics up for you on your animals. So now we split it up onto a sex level. So we've got our male animals and our female animals. So remember I said we have a difference between the total animals and the active animals. So the active animals are those that are currently on your farm and are alive according to Logix. And the total is all the animals that you as a breeder have measured and all the data that you have sent through to Logix and is in the system. So this breeder currently has 118 male animals with a weaning weight that are alive on his farm, but in his historical data, he has measured 5,620 male animals for weaning weight, with their average being 31.1, but his active animal average is 36. So that is an indication that the animals that are alive have been selected for because they have a heavier weaning weight. And we can also see that with the post-wean weight, or die naspieengewig, that it's 61 kgs for his historical, but the animals that are currently alive have a 65.8. So he's obviously selecting heavier animals for weaning and post-wean. And then we obviously have the breed's historical average as well as the breed's current average. So you can benchmark your flock against the breed's average. So this breeder's historical weaning weight is heavier than the breed's historical weaning weight, as well as the animals that he currently has in his flock also have a heavier weaning weight than the average of the breed. So he can see, okay, I have on average larger animals at weaning than the rest of the breed. So it just allows you to be able to compare your historical and active against that of the breed. but we give it to you in a graphic as well, which is then a little bit more easier to digest, but we'll get to that graphic soon. Okay, then this graph is just with regards to the inbreeding coefficient of your flock. So remember that the total is all the animals that are in your flock. That includes animals that you may have bought in. While the blue line is those animals that were born in the flock. So here we can see an example of a breeder whose animals that were born in the flock, their average inbreeding is lower than that of the total herd. That tells me that the animals that he brought in to use as breeding stock may have had a higher inbreeding coefficient. But that also might be because of the depth of their pedigree, and it might be a more accurate pedigree line at the same time. And then the red line is the breed. So you can just benchmark yourself against the breed and see what is happening in the breed. And then we just give you guys the inbreeding coefficients that are going to occur when these specific matings happen, just so you guys can know, and that the 6.25% is the suggested threshold not to cross. Okay, so now you've seen the averages of your animals that are active, but what's the age distribution of your animals? You want to see, okay, from what years are the majority of my animals? So here we have a distribution of the male and female animals in this breeder's flock. So from 2015 is the majority of the rams, but he has a 2011 ram. That might be an older ram that he's kept around, but he has no rams from 2012, 13, and 14. And obviously the majority of his flock is made up of his ewes that are giving birth to these lambs. And you'll see here in 2022, where we have over 250 active animals that were born in 2022, male animals, and over 600 active female animals on his farm that were born from 2022. So these are all of his lambs that have been born and he has registered on Logix, and now we can see the distribution. So obviously something here with the 2020 and 2021 ewes, he didn't keep as many as replacements as he did in, say, 2018 and 2019. We can see that because of the stock difference in the line of the graph. Okay, you as breeders, when you register an animal on Logix, you give us a lot of information. You give us the information of how the animal was conceived. You give us the dam and you give us the ram. You also give us was it born as a single, as a twin, or a triplet? But we want you guys to know, okay, how much of my flock is coming from a specific conception way. So here we have an example of a breeder that's using a lot of hormonal procedures where they synchronize all their ewes using some form of reproductive technology. There's quite a various amounts of them, and you can see here that all the codes for conception 4, 5, 6, and 7, they all fall under the light blue. So you guys give us that, and this is evidence. This is just to show that we do capture this data and we can actually give it back to you in a good way. So what we're going to do and add to this graph is the percentage of the animals as well per year that are most probably being born from each procedure. So we can see that this breeder is doing a lot of synchronizing of his ewes, most probably artificially inseminating them, and with either with the laparoscopy or just with sponges and AI, and has now been growing his flock that way. Well, then some other breeders are still practicing natural mating. This guy did practice artificial insemination in 2016 and 2017, but maybe he thought he could get better conception rates by also synchronizing his ewes and getting them onto some hormonal procedure that assisted that. But he still has ewes that are being naturally mated by rams in his flock, and those ewes are still being born. Compared to one breeder who, since 2017, his entire flock of lambs is being conceived through natural mating. So we can compare, and it's good to see the different practices across breeds as well as within a breed. Some breeders have different ways of conceiving their lambs. And then we can also give you the birth status of your lambs. So you tell us if that lamb was a single or a twin. And now we can give you guys a visual representation of the majority of the lambs born in this flock are singles. He does have a good twinning rate. And now and again, he has some triplets. In comparison to this breeder, who has a higher twinning rate than he has a single rate, and also has quite a high incidence of triplets. So it's good. You can also see the different, this is most probably dependent on breed, and also could do with flush feeding or some other management that this breeder has going on. It also could be someone who's doing the hormonal procedures with the synchronizing and the AI at the same time. So we've had the conception status of the animals. We've had the were they born as a single, twin, or a triplet? But you also send us the time of the year that they were born. So we can also look and give back to you, when do you guys have your lambing seasons? And then we have other graphs in the report that then say, okay, the lambs born in June and July had a heavier birth weight than those in August and September. And you can see, oh, was that because of my management or the environment? So it's cool to see the lambing seasons. And we can see that this breeder seems to be lambing throughout the year. There's no distinct trend over years. It seems that like 2020, the blue line, and 2021, the purple line, and the black line, 2022, there's no trend between them. So it seems that he is not giving that the lambing is not occurring simultaneously at the same time of the year. In comparison to this breeder, who is consistently having 3 lambing seasons throughout the year at the same time in the year over the last 4 years. So here's a breeder who has consistently having these lambing seasons at the same time of the year over all of these years. And then we have a breeder who has one distinct lambing season from May until September, but there's no other lambs being born from December all the way until April, because I don't see those months on the graph. So it tells me that this breeder has a very distinct breeding season. Okay, then we move on to the measurements of reproductive success. So most of the ewes that are currently in your flock, if you have been a long-term breeder, originate from within your flock. They are the replacement ewes from your previous years of lambs. But sometimes you would like to know, okay, from which year did I keep the most? Did I keep the most ewes? Or in which year did I have the highest erosion of my ewes? So here we can see this gray bar is the total amount of ewes that were born that year, the number of female animals. And the pink line is the number of them that had an age at first lambing. The second line is how many of them had an interlambing period 1, so lambed for a second time. And the green one is how many of them lambed for a third time, so they have an interlambing period 2. So we can see that not all ewes that lamb the first time will make it to the second lambing. And it seems that the drop between the second and third lambing is greater than that of the first and the second lambing. So it's good to see, okay, what is the erosion of the females in my flock, as well as how intensely am I selecting these females. We then come to a trend graph here. Dr. Bernice said that we can give you the average of your traits, as well as allow you to benchmark yourself against the breed. So you can see that the key is on the right of the graph, with the dotted lines being the maximum and the other one being the minimum. So that is your entire range. So all your animals have an age at first lambing within the dotted lines. The blue line is the flock's average, and the red line is the breed's average. So this breeder, on average, his ewes will lamb at a younger age than that of the breed. And we can see that the blue line is consistently below that of the breeds. The gray area is the first standard deviation. So it's the one standard deviation above and one standard deviation below. A very important statistic to remember with a standard deviation is that in this gray area is 65% of the animals in your flock occur in this range. So we can see here in 2016 and 2017 that the standard deviation is at the same place as the max, as the breed average. So that means that 65% of the animals, which is the gray area, plus another 15%, so 80% is from the top of the gray line to the minimum, is that 80% of the animals in this breeder's flock that year had an age at first lambing younger than that of the breed. I will explain that same concept again on a weaning weight graph. It's quite an important one to remember. When you see this gray area, just know that that is 65% of your animals occur in that gray shaded area. And then in this one, we had a breeder who was having about 200 ewes on average, 180, 200 ewes every year, and was keeping anywhere between 70 to about 90 of them. But then obviously some of you breeders have different sized flocks. Some breeders have smaller flocks and some breeders have much larger flocks. Here we have a breeder with a smaller flock. He's only on average having anywhere between 15 to 45 animals female animals being born every year. And he's only keeping anywhere between 5 and 12 of them around. So because he has less animals, the amount of variation is most probably going to be lower. And we can also see that his average here is quite erratic. It's not like a smooth trend like the last one was. So here in 2018, he only had 1 or 2 female animals that he actually has an age at first lambing for. That's why the average and the maximum and the minimum have squished together, because there is probably, it looks like there is only one measurement for this year. So it has squished together. There is no variation in 2018 on age at first lambing because there are not many animals measured for that trait. But like in 2019, we can see now more animals were measured for the trait. There's a max and a min, and the average and the standard deviation falls between that. So here where the standard deviation comes outside of the max or the min line, it's because there is not a lot of data, so we cannot accurately calculate the variation, or it's not as accurate as calculating the variation, say here, where we have 60 to 70 female animals with an age at first lambing. So remember that the more animals that you measure, the more accurate your trend lines will be as well. Okay, then we have the total amount of ewes that were born per year that are currently in your flock. So this is just a helpful guide to see what is the age structure of my flock and where do the majority of my females lie. The young Oya is also important because some of you breeders have young ewes that have never lambed, that are 7 or 8 years old, that are still on logics and are still active, but they've never had a lambing record. So that tells me that that animal is most probably not alive in your flock and needs to be cancelled on Logix. That it is still alive on Logix, but it needs to be cancelled. And I'll give you I'll show you that we have a table for that in this report that you guys can get. Here's just another breeder's spread of animals, and the majority of his young ewes are those that were born in the last 3 or 4 years that have yet to lamb. And then here you can compare your ewe herd, which is the blue line. So this breeder does not have any ewes that are older than 7 years because none of them were born before 2015. And he can compare that to the breed. So there you can see here, this breed still has animals from 2011 that are active, but this breeder only has animals from 2015 onwards that are active. And his trend is quite similar to that of the breeds. In comparison to this breeder, whose ewe spread of his flock is slightly different to that of the breed. You can see here in 2020 and 2021, he has a lower percentage of animals per year, but in 2018 and 2019, he has a higher. So he's obviously kept his 2018, 2019 ewes as his replacement ewes, and he didn't like his 2020, 2021 crop of ewes, and seemingly has less of them around in his flock in comparison to the breed. And then I said that we have an action list of animals that have not lambed. So this animal, SASB 1538, she was born in 2015. She is still active on Logix, and she's 95 months old, but she's never lambed. So that tells me that that animal is not alive, or her information of lambing opportunities has not been loaded on Logix. So it's just to let you as the breeder know, oh, maybe I should go cancel this animal on Logix. And then the one on the right is, apologies, I did not fix the heading up here, I should have, but it's the days since last lambing. So some ewes have lambed before, so they have an age at first lambing, but they haven't lambed. This one hasn't lambed in almost 7 years. In 2,534 days, she has not lambed, but she is still active on the system. So that means that she most probably needs to be cancelled. And then that will make the genetic window that you receive in your weekly or monthly genetic report from Logix more accurate. Because if the animal is active, it is still contributing to the average of your genetic window of your flock. Okay, and then here we have the phenotypic trends of the first and second interlambing period. So this is just to show you guys that the data that you are recording is on the system and that we can give it back to you in this easy to digest way with the min, the max, the standard deviation, and the averages. I haven't seen any questions and none of my colleagues have stopped me yet. Are there no questions yet?
You can carry on, Jason.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Bernice. Okay, so we've gone through the birth notification of the animal, how the animal was conceived, what was its birth status as a twin, as well as all your ewe data, because all the ewe data with regards to age at first lambing and interlambing periods is all based on birth notifications of their lambs. That's how the Logix system calculates those traits that we just went through. But now we are going to go through the traits that you as a breeder measure in the farm, and you send them through Logix to us. These are all your performance weights from birth to mature weight, And if you're a wool breeder, you do wool testing. And if you're not a wool breeder, you most probably are participating in growth tests. And we also show that data here. So this breeder is a wool breeder. We can see that because on the key on the right, the purple bar is the number of animals that he is sending in for a wool test. The gray bar is the total number of animals that were born that year. And then we can see that this breeder did not measure birth weight until 2022. Then he started measuring birth weight, probably to assist in getting extra points for his elite scorecard, because we do give points to breeders that measure all the traits that we ask the breeders to measure, these being birth weight, pre-wean, wean, post-wean, and mature weight, as well as maybe a growth test or the wool trait test or the wool tests. But we can see that this breeder is measuring the majority of his animals for weaning weight, as well as sending quite a lot of them for wool weights. While this breeder, you could see from 2014 to 2016, was only measuring weaning weight, but from 2017 started measuring his post-wean weight, or the naasbeen gewig, as well as started sending his animals into a growth test, which is the dark blue line. You can also see in 2019 and 2020 that he also measured some of those animals for their mature weight. So it's just a good way of seeing, okay, what traits does he measure? And did this breeder adopt more traits to measure within his flock, or has he stopped measuring certain traits? But then even if you've stopped measuring, we can still show you that you have measured, and all that historical data is still present on the system. So even though you don't measure that trait anymore, all the animals that you did measure, they're still there on the system. We didn't throw them away. And then you get a breeder like this breeder who seems to measure everything. He measures birth weight, he measures pre-wean, he measures wean, he measures post-wean, and he measures mature. He doesn't seem to be measuring mature weight consistently across these birth years, the last time being in 2019, but from birth to post-wean, he seems to be measuring all of his animals. And if I would go to look at his data, 2022, I don't think his animals are old enough to be measured for post-wean. That's why the animals in 2022 don't have a post-wean bar. So yeah, it's good to see the differences between certain breeders as well as the percentage of animals. And we can actually give you the percentage of animals that you as breeders are measuring. So here's a breeder who only measures weaning weight, and he's measuring about 77% of his male lambs or his male animals for weaning weight, but not measuring any of them for growth, for birth, for pre-wean, and for post-wean, as well as not putting any of them in a growth test. So we can see the depth of your measurements, and the depth of your measurements is also an indication of how accurate the breeding values in your flock are. So if you're not measuring the majority of your animals, we can then make the inclination that your breeding values are most probably not stable or are most probably not accurate, because you're not measuring the traits that these breeding values are indicating the genetic potential for. Compared to this breeder who measures, it's the same breeder as I showed before, who actually measures everything. And we can see he measures 100% of his animals for birth weight, 94% for pre-wean, 83% for wean, and 60% for naasbeen. These percentages are also a small indication of his loss of lambs. Yes, he measured all of them for birth weight, but not all of them may have survived to pre-wean. Some of them might have died, they might have got sick, they might have been taken by a jackal. And that can also be, the 83% can also be an indication of the loss of lambs from birth to wean. So that's also something to keep in mind. And these are percentages that are an indication of this breeder has accurate breeding values that are most probably stable within his flock. And then we also have here's just one of a wool breeder. The other one was this breeder is not a wool breeder, so you can see he's measuring for mature weight. This breeder is a wool breeder. He measures 83% of his animals for weaning weight. And then he obviously, from those weaning weight breeding values, he'll then select the animals that he then sends for the wool test. So he's obviously only selecting half of the animals that he weaned to then send for his wool test. So it's good to see what are the depth of measurements of his wool test within his entire flock. And an important thing to see is that it is over the last 5 years. So in the next couple of years, if you decide to change your practice to, say, increase the depth of your measurements on your animals, or to start measuring a new measurement that you've never measured before, it will update. So obviously this breeder measures birth weight, and he may continue to measure birth weight. So this 7% will grow as he starts to continuously measure birth weight in his flock. Because he's only measured 7% in the last 5 years, but it looks like he measured about 30% of the animals within 2022. So that's just something to keep in mind as well. I'm pressing. Okay. So now back to a trend line graph. So here we did it with the age at first lambing. Here we have it for birth weight. Here we've split birth weight between the rams and the ewes. And you can see the blue line is the average. The shaded area is one standard deviation, which is 65% of the animals are in the shaded area. And we have the maximum and the minimum. Here we can see that this breeder's average birth weight is very much in line with that of the breed. So we can see and also where there is variation. So the minimum and the maximum is an indication of the amount of variation present within your flock, which is always something good to know. Is there actually variation in the trait that I am measuring? If we move over to weaning weight, this one's quite good. We can now see that this breeder has increased the average weaning weight of his flock over years. That it does fluctuate. It has come down slightly since 2020, but that it is increasing over time if we look at it on average. What I wanted to explain again with this graph, it's a bit easier to explain with the weaning weight graph. Remember that the standard deviation is 65% of the animals are occurring within this gray area. But if we go from the bottom of the gray area to the maximum, that's 80% of the animals are occurring from this number. On your PDF, on your Adobe Acrobat, you can push this weight and it will come up, but I'm not using Adobe Acrobat, so I can't give you an example of what I'm saying. That 85% of the animals are from this shade, the bottom of the shaded area, to the maximum, and 85% of your animals are from the top of the shaded area to the minimum. So you can see where does the majority of my animals' variation lies. And this breeder's variation seems to lie between 25 and 35 kgs, even though his range is 40 to about 15, as a minimum of about 15 kgs at weaning. So it's good to see where does your variation lie, as well as am I actually increasing the average weaning weight of my animals in my flock. Here we just have another trend. This one was just from 2014 to 2023. and it seems to be consistent, but here we have some outliers that seem to narrow the range. So obviously there were some heavier animals in this year. Something we wanted to also give to you guys was, what is the average weaning weight of your twins? What is the average weaning weight of your singles? And what is the average weaning weight of your triplets? So here we can see this triplet is an outlier in 2021, that they had an average weaning weight of 60 kgs. But the majority of your animals of your singles are on the green line, and the majority of your twins are on the blue line. And you can see that difference between the weaning weights of a single and a twin. Here it's a bit better on the ewes. There's no outlier as there is here on the rams. So we can definitely see the trend difference between singles and twins at weaning. I just have another graph here. This breeder seems to have no outliers, that there's a consistent trend between single lambs and twin lambs, and that his triplets are on average around the same weight as his twins, and that might be because he's assisting in the feeding of those triplets, or gave one of the triplets to a ewe that may have lost a lamb. So that triplet now became technically a single in its while it's being raised by a ewe that may have lost one of her lambs. So yeah, it's just a good trend to look at. Okay, then we also have the trend here for post-wean, as I indicated earlier, that some breeders in the past may have been measuring a trait and now they stopped measuring a trait. That doesn't mean that that data is no longer on Logix or is being used in your BLUP evaluation for your flock and for the breed. So it's just to show that all historical data is still on the system and is still being used in the BLUP genetic evaluation. And then here we have a phenotypic trend for fiber diameter. So we can see that this breeder has been obviously selecting for a more desirable fiber diameter, or a thinner fiber diameter, and that his maximum fiber diameter for 2021 is the average of what his fiber diameter was in 2014, and that he has changed his average from that of being above the breeds, and his average fiber diameter is now thinner than that of the breed. And if we look at the standard deviation, 80% of his animals are below the breed average for fiber diameter within this breeder's flock. So we can see here, this breeder has made significant phenotypic progress from 2014 to 2021 by obviously selecting the right animals. And then some of the breeders also measure their animals in a growth test, that they measure their average daily gain. So we can see here that this breeder has been doing growth tests consistently, and his average daily gain, has increased over the last 8 years. So we can see that through the trend. And then at the bottom here, we can see that this breeder is also measuring his ewes, but not a lot of them. That's why the minimum and the maximum for 2018, 19, and 20 is exactly the same as the average. It's most probably only one animal that has been measured. So there is no variation or phenotypic variation in these years because of the low number of animals. Here, there are a lot of animals being measured for average daily gain. Okay, and then you have now, the animal has been born, you've measured it for its performance measurements traits, and it has most probably lambed. But now the animal, it's time for the animal to leave the flock. It's either dead, or you sold it, or it got rejected for some reason by the society, or it got eaten by a predator, or it got struck by lightning. For some reason, this animal is no longer alive in your flock. So it has an exit reason, or an uitskot rede. So these are the reasons that are on the system that you as a breeder can say, okay, this one, I sold it. This one, I castrated this ram and it's no longer going to be in breeding stock, so I cancel it from the flock. I don't know why it died. There's an unknown reason, or it was cancelled because this breeder is cancelling mainly because of per capita, or is selling the majority of his animals from his flock, or he is getting the society to cancel them based on their production. So we can see that there are quite a few reasons that you guys can put down, but that some breeders just put all of their animals in one category. But there are breeders that are consistently putting the correct reason why, like I castrated them, or I sold them, or I put them in my commercial flock. Here at the bottom, this breeder seems to have a lot of mortalities in the form of the animal just dying, or that they were rejected at inspection, that the inspector did not think that that animal was of a suitable type for that breed, or once again, the society is doing it based on a production aspect. So we are capturing this data, and we do present it to you in your report for you, so you can see, okay, where are the animals that are leaving my flock? Why are they leaving my flock? Did I sell them? Did they die? Was there a disease? Or did the inspector think that that year's bunch of lambs were not up to scratch to be stud animals of your breed? And then lastly, at the end, we give you a table of where we suggest to you the animals that are genetically poor or genetically inferior within your flock. And we will base that based on the logic merit index, or the associated index that you have as a breeder in your breed. We know that some breeds have a breed specific merit index. So depending on what your breed is, we will list the animals that we think are worth not breeding with because they are genetically inferior. And then we will obviously provide the other indices. So you can see, oh, she's poor on fertility, or she's poor on growth, or hell, she's poor on both. Let's get rid of her. She's bringing down the average breeding, the average genetic potential of your flock. So maybe it's time for that animal to not breed anymore. So yeah, that brings me to the end of this Logix flock analysis. I hope you have some questions for me if you didn't understand something, and we hope to have this report live on Logix very soon, so you guys can all look at your data that you have sent to us, and we can now give back to you in a nicely digestible report. So yeah, thank you. Are there any questions?
Dankie Jason, jy praat so vreeslik baie mooi Engels. Jy hoef nie Engels te vra in Engels te vra nie, hoor. Nie skaam wees nie. Ons is besig om dit beskikbaar te maak op Logix, soos vir die vleisbeeste sin ook. Maar intussen kan julle dit net van ons af aanvra, dan kan ons dit vir julle stuur. Enige vrae?
Hallo dokter.
Hallo.
Hallo dokter, is Steenis wat praat, ja. Dankie vir die aanbieding, Jason ook. Ek wil sommer net vra op slide 38 oor die diere wat gekanselleer word. Het daai redes wat jy verskaf hoekom hulle gekanselleer word enige invloed op die genetiese kant van die diere?
Dennis, nee, nie op die oomblik nie, wat ons graag, ons soek graag die inligting vir die toekoms as ons dalk begin kyk na langslewendheid teelwaardes vir die kleinveerasse, dan gaan ons daai inligting nodig hê. So dit is eintlik baie belangrik dat dit akkuraat vir ons gestuur moet word.
Okay, nee, is reg, baie dankie.
Nog enige vrae?
Hallo, kan julle my hoor?
Bernard, ons hoor jou.
Ek het net 'n vraag ook. Baie keer dan sal jy 'n ram se nommer intik op Smolstok SA en dan sal jy sien dat hy nog geen lammers gespeen het nie, maar jy weet dat van sy dogters en van sy seuns was al op veilinge verkoop, maar dit wys nog nie dat hy al enige lammers gespeen het nie. Ek weet nou nie eintlik hoe werk daai nie.
Bernard, ons weet net die lammers is gespeen as ons daai lammers se speengewigte kry. So dit kan wees dat sy lammers in kuddes is wat nie die speengewigte instuur nie.
Okay. Baie dankie.
Is waarskynlik wat gebeur.
Okay, dankie.
Goed. Nog enige ietsie?
Goeienaand Bernice, Johan Kutsie hierso. Ek wil net gou navraag doen. Ons as doniteerders het nou obviously 'n kudde kenmerk en dan nou 'n stoetnommer wat geallokeer is vir julle by Stamboek. Maar vir ons doeleindes het ons nou, kom ons noem dit vir die argument van die gesprek, tweede kudde as ek dit nou so kan noem, en ons wil graag, ons hou reeds baie akkuraat rekords daarvan, maar ons wil graag van hierdie verslae wil gebruik maak. Hoe werk 'n mens te werk rondom dit, om dit dan nou op daai moontlikheid reg te kry?
Julle data kom deur na ons toe, nê? Kry jy 'n genetiese verslag?
In terme van die stoetdiere wat by die Doniteerdergenootskap geregistreer is, korrek, ja. Maar daar is ook 'n groot verskeidenheid van, kom ons noem dit kudde diere wat nog glad nie deur die stoetproses was in terme van fenotipiese klasse goed nie, alhoewel ons baie fokus op reproduksie rondom hulle. Kan 'n mens hulle inbring sonder dat dit jou syfers rondom die stoet affekteer of nie?
Herman, kan jy dalk hierop antwoord?
Ja, goeienaand, dis Herman hierso. Ja, ons is besig om 'n diens saam te stel waar ons daai kudde diere dan kan aanteken en vir hulle ook waardes kan gee. Dit gaan nie dieselfde as die stoet wees nie, maar hulle sal ook waardes kry sodat jy presisieboerdery op jou vroulike diere kan doen op jou kudde ooier. Ek hoop dit antwoord jou vraag.
Okay, 100% doodreg, baie dankie.
Maar hou so lank jou data reg, hoor?
Doodreg, ons maak so.
Nog enige ietsie?
Hallo,
Hallo Kara,
hoe gaan dit?
goed met jou?
Alraai, dankie. Ek is 'n nuwe kleinveeboer. Ek is deel van die Oudestaansgenootskap. En ek is nog nie heeltemal seker hoe alles werk nie, maar ek sien al hierdie gewigte wat ons moet deurgee vir 'n beter weer blip
Ja,
rekord of so. Is daar enige regulasies in verband met die ouderdom van daai gewig? Daarmee geboortegewig is nou natuurlik by geboorte, maar
Ja.
sekere mense speen op 2 maande, dan 3 maande. Ek is nie heeltemal seker nie, is daar 'n leiding wat iewers is
Ja.
wat ek kan kyk?
Ja Kara, ek kan dit vir jou, ons het 'n handleiding waar daai riglyne in staan, ek kan dit vir jou aanstuur, hoor?
Ag, baie dankie.
Goed, nog enige vrae? Goed, ja, ek dink ons is dan klaar vanaand.
Baie dankie Bernice, baie dankie vir almal wat so getrou gebly het tot die einde. Ek sien ons is nog 43 op, dis regtig, julle gee die vleisbees ouens pak sla, hulle was 'n week terug. Die kleinvee is regtig vuur en vlam vir die goed. Jason, thanks very much. I always said you're a good teacher, but it shouldn't go to your head. Just be as humble as you are. Thanks for that. Really enjoyed tonight as well. Bernice, dankie vir jou reëlings ook en Herman, jou reëlings agter die skerms en die tegniese adviseurs. Ons het dit opgeneem. Ons sal julle laat weet wanneer ons dit dalk beskikbaar. Ons sal dit op Stambok se YouTube kanaal sit en dan kan julle dalk weer rustig gaan kyk na die tyd. So geniet die aand verder en Pix, ek sien jy's ook op welkom. Ons wil ook sommer nou al iets adverteer. Ons op die 2de Mei het ons 'n kleinvee symposium, kort symposiumpie waar Pix en ek gaan praat. Dit gaan ook uitgesaai word lewendig, so julle kan miskien in julle dagboeke so lank aanteken. So ons sien uit na daai oggend ook vroegoggend. So geniet die aand verder en baie dankie vir julle tyd. Ons sien uit daarna om sommer als uit te brei wat dit aanbetref. Goed gaan.